Welcome everyone. Glad you're joining us as we discuss the four faces of God. Hopefully you've already listened to the first video, part 1. This is part 2, and this is where we're going to talk about the first face of God. That is the Gospel of Matthew, and that is the face of the lion. So let me give you some scriptures to start, just so that you can not get too weirded out when I say the four faces of God, and we call the first face the lion. I'm sure you're familiar that God is referred to as the Lion of the tribe of Judah. Maybe you've heard that in the Christian circles, but let me give you some other scriptures. First, the book of Hosea, chapter 11, verse 10 says this: "They will walk after the Lord. He will roar like a lion. Indeed, he will roar, and his sons will come trembling from the west." Then in the book of Amos, chapter 1, the prophet says, "The Lord roars from Zion, and from Jerusalem he utters his voice, and the shepherd's pasture grounds mourn, and the summit of Carmel dries up." Now, when we say that the first face of God is like that of a lion, we're not trying to say that God literally, physically has a lion face, and when you look at him, he's going to have like the hair follicles of the lion's mane and the whiskers. That's not what we're saying here. What we're saying is that the lion represents, carries, reflects, reveals, shows forth the glory of God expressed in that face of the lion. So the first face of God from those four living creatures that are around his throne, the lion, the calf, the man, and the flying eagle, those are the four faces. The first one is the lion, and that parallels the first gospel, the Gospel of Matthew. So, as I discussed in the part 1 of this series, we're going to talk about some themes of the lion. When you think of a lion, what do you think about? Well, usually you first think about territory, dominion, power. You know, a lion roars over his territory. A lion establishes his territory. And that's definitely a theme that you see in the Gospel of Matthew. A couple of other themes that you see, and this isn't an all-inclusive list, because hopefully this is going to spur you on to go and read the Gospel of Matthew and to engage God's face and to see his face and be transformed by his face in your relationship with him. But some of the other themes are kingdom. The Gospel of Matthew has emphasis on kingdom. There's a lot of language and verbiage of the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom's at hand, kingdom. Territory is a theme in the Gospel of Matthew. Dominion, kingship, royalty, mountains. In the Gospel of Matthew, mountains are mentioned more than any other gospel. Jesus begins his ministry on a mountain. Also, another theme for the Gospel of Matthew, the face of the lion, is righteousness. Righteousness is important. Righteousness is the standard. Just like a lion would set the standard when he roars, he's saying, hey, this is the standard. This is how we're going to live. This is the bar that we're setting in the kingdom. So you have the lion. God is clearly seen as being compared to, as being illustrated, as being personified, having the voice and the roar of a lion, the strength of a lion, who establishes his kingdom, who identifies the people of the kingdom, the people of the pride of the lion. And that's what Jesus does. We covered that we see the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. And in the Gospel of Matthew, the face of Jesus Christ, the story of Jesus Christ, we see Jesus Christ revealing that identity of the lion. He is the Lion of the tribe of Judah that overcomes. And in Revelation, an elder also sees him as a lion who is worthy and one who has overcome to open the book, to break its seals. John then sees that lion as a lamb, but nonetheless, he is seen as a lion. So, those are some of the themes of the Gospel of Matthew: kingdom, territory, dominion, kingship, royalty, mountains, righteousness. The next thing is there's a key to each gospel. And the key for the Gospel of Matthew is this. In chapter 1, verse 21 and 23, it talks about that God is Emmanuel. He is God with us, and that he will save his people from their sins. When he saves them from their sins, he's bringing them into the kingdom. So you have this identification of the purpose and the key for the Gospel of Matthew. Everything that happens in the Gospel of Matthew is really going to be centered about this theme. That theme of, here is God with us, God in our midst, Emmanuel, and he's come to save his people from their sins, thereby bringing them into the kingdom that he is establishing. Also, part of his purpose isn't just to come as a lion and destroy people and to tear people apart. That's not what he's doing. What he's doing as the lion is that he's protecting his people, and he's bringing them out of their own sin, out of their own mess, into the kingdom so that they may be saved. That's the key in Matthew. And what I mean by key is that as you read the Gospel of Matthew, you're going to see that reality play out in how Jesus talks and things that happens, the signs, the wonders, how the story is written from the writer of the Gospel of Matthew is going to illustrate that throughout, bringing his people into his kingdom. Next thing would be the genealogy of Jesus. Maybe you've wondered, why is the genealogy different in Matthew than it is from Mark and that it is from Luke and that it is from John? Part of the difference is because the writer of the Gospel of Matthew, inspired by God, is revealing that reality of the face of the lion, the king. And so what does he do with the genealogy? He doesn't start the genealogy with Adam from the garden. He starts really with Abraham, who is the father of the faith, who is the beginning of the lineage, who was called out from the Gentile, from the pagan, from the mess of the world. He's called out by God, singled out by God, chosen by God, and he begins the start of the Jewish people, the Hebrew people. And so he's identified as the son of Abraham and the son of David. Why David? Ding, ding, ding. Once again, he's pointing out this is the king. This is the Messiah who's coming. So it starts with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Then it goes down all the way to David. And then David to the Messiah, whom Jesus is. And that's the genealogy of Jesus. It doesn't cover everybody all the way back to Adam because he's wanting you to see the purpose of the kingship of the lion. And that Jesus, as the lion, is fulfilling those prophecies of the king coming, the Messiah coming. He's fulfilling the promises given to David, the greatest king that Israel knew, and that were given to Abraham, the father of all of Israel and all of the people. So that's a little tidbit with the genealogy of Jesus that's revealing that face of the lion. Some other things that are interesting about the Gospel of Matthew are, when you think about the Gospel of Matthew, it starts and it tells you this conflict with Herod. Jesus is born and he has to flee. An angel comes and reveals it to Joseph in a dream. Hey, flee, get out of here. And then he tells him when to come back. He tells him how to maneuver. What is all the purpose to this? And why do these magi show up? And the magi are bringing gifts for who? For a king, for royalty. That's because a lion is royal. And as you see Jesus as royal, as you see him as the King of Kings, guess what you're going to be transformed into? You're going to be transformed into the royalty that God has for you and the royalty and the kingship that God's called you into. But you have these magi bringing these gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh, and wow, this is incredible. And Herod's freaking out because he's a king and he's recognizing, hey, this is a threat to my kingdom. I've got to do something. He tries to kill all the firstborn, but he can't kill Jesus because the king of all kings, the greatest king of all, isn't going to be killed by a lesser king. He is the lion. He's going to identify his territory. He's going to rule. He's going to reign. That's one of the things about the Gospel of Matthew. You don't find the story of Herod trying to kill Jesus in the other Gospels. That's because it's in the Gospel of Matthew to show you that uniqueness of the lion. And the truth is, when you're a king and you have a kingdom, other kings and other kingdoms are going to come against you. So that's part of what you're seeing in Matthew there. I mentioned that one of the themes was mountains. Mountains are important. Jesus, in his ministry in the Gospel of Matthew, starts his ministry with the Sermon on the Mount. Mountain represents government, authority, power, strength. Think about the beauty and the majesty of a mountain. It's incredible. It's solid. It has strength and stability. So that's what you see with the lion. The lion is strong. The lion has stability. And Matthew puts more emphasis on mountains than any other gospel. Some of the miracles that happen when Jesus feeds people, where do they happen? He identifies that it happened on mountains. When Jesus speaks, the Sermon on the Mount, it happened on a mountain. You have the Mount of Transfiguration. So mountains are highlighted, they're pointed out, and they also come into play at the end of the Gospel of Matthew, which we're going to discuss a little bit later on. But the Great Commission happens where? on a mountain, because this is the face of the lion. We talked about righteousness is a theme in the Gospel of Matthew. Well, righteousness is mentioned 6 times in the Gospel of Matthew. Check this out. How many times is it mentioned in Luke? 1. How many times in Mark? 0. How many times in John? 2. What's the deal with that? It doesn't mean that righteousness isn't important to Luke or to Mark or to John. It just means that the face of the lion, the face of that standard, the glory of God that we see in the face of Christ is revealed by the righteousness of Christ shown forth in the lion, that face that reveals the glory of God. It's also true that in the Gospel of Matthew, there are several times, 10 or 11, depending on how you count it, where Jesus fulfills what was written by the prophets. And you have that phrase identified in the scripture over 10 times at different things and different points. But that's another aspect of the Gospel of Matthew. Think about this. It's in the Gospel of Matthew that when Peter confesses who Christ is, it's Christ who says, "And I say that you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it." Well, what is that? That sounds like some kingdom warfare to some degree. That sounds like a lion marking his territory, identifying his territory, and saying, look, I'm going to win. I'm going to be victorious. Hell's not going to beat me. I'm going to overcome hell. And that's what he does. Also in the Gospel of Matthew, you find that Jesus says, hey, if I wanted to, in the midst of this crucifixion, I could call down 12 legions of angels. You don't find that in the other Gospels. Why is that? Because a king obviously has an army. Now, he doesn't choose to use those 12 legions of angels at the moment when he's being betrayed by his friend, because he's still following the will of the Father to fulfill the standard of righteousness and the fullness of the kingdom. But he could have called those angels. He could have killed everybody that was there. He could have come down and said, look, I am the lion. I'm going to show it and prove it to you. But he's not going to act out of his own selfish desire. He was there to fulfill the will of the Father, and that's what he did. Even though he was the King of all kings, fulfilling all righteousness, fulfilling the prophecies, the Son of David, the Son of Abraham, the Messiah, the glory of God in the face of the lion. Wow, that's pretty awesome. Next thing is that with the lion, this is a little bit different, because we talked about when you see God's face, you're going to be transformed into that same image. But here's the thing. In the book of Romans chapter 1, Paul highlights 4 animals in which we as humanity have exchanged the glory of God for. The lion is one of the glories of God. He's revealing the glory of God in that face of the lion. But here's the thing that the lion has to be aware of. When in our lives, Jesus didn't make this mistake. He didn't make this exchange. But in the book of Romans chapter 1, Paul says that they exchanged the glory of God. Think about that. They exchanged the glory of God. They had the glory of God. Professing to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of corruptible man and of birds and of 4-footed animals and crawling creatures. Those 4 things parallel these 4 faces that we're going to be discussing. But to stay on track with the lion has a lesser image of glory, and that is of the corruptible man. Now, what is a corruptible man? The corruptible man is really the man of iniquity who tries to be perfect inside of himself. And Jesus could have done this many times. In the Gospel of Matthew, those 12 legions of angels would have been one of them. He could have been the perfect man, the most powerful man, ruling the armies of angels, coming to kill his enemies, coming to kill that guy who betrayed him, coming to kill those soldiers who were going to mock him and spit on him and shame him and crucify him. But he didn't exchange the glory of God and the identity of that face of the lion for a lesser image of being a corruptible man, having that perfect image as man, being that image of, I'm man and I'm the best man. Look at me. Look at my strength. Look at my power. Look at who I can control. Look at who I can defeat. That's not what he did. He walked in his true identity and his calling as the lion that reveals the glory of God. So the lesser image for the lion that exchanges is that of the corruptible man. And the lion is loud, the lion can roar, the lion can be direct, the lion can be blunt and honest. We definitely see that in Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew. But there's a distinction between being the lion that God's called you to be and that you behold his face, and exchanging the glory of the lion for the glory of the corruptible man who can be pompous and proud and put himself above others. That's not what Jesus does. So that's the lesser of image of glory for the lion, the face of the lion. And I want to conclude with the commission that is in the Gospel of Matthew. If you're familiar with the Gospel of Matthew, you know that you're probably familiar with Matthew's commission, which reads in the last chapter, Jesus has risen, he's come, and he's with his disciples, and guess where they are? They're on a mountain. And when they see him, they fall down, they worship him, and it's wonderful. Even though they were doubting, they still worshiped him. And then Jesus says this, he spoke to them saying, all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. So the commissioning at the end of Matthew once again puts a bookend on this face of the lion. How is that? Well, Jesus identifies all power and all authority has been given to me. I'm reflecting, I'm showing forth, I'm revealing the glory of God in the face of the lion, powerful, strong, stable, here to declare his kingdom, here to make disciples of all nations, here to impact all of the nations, not just some people here and there, but all nations, make disciples. This commission is more of a command. It's a direct command. He's not just saying, hey, this is what I want you to do. He's saying, I'm the king. I have the power. I have the authority. This is what I'm sending you to do as a king. And guess what? As I send you, I'm with you always. And that means that the power and the authority is with you always. And so go forth in the fullness of that commission. And so he not only takes his position as king in the fullness of that kingship, but he then begins to commission the kings that are seeing him, beholding him, looking at him, following him in the kingship that he's called them to. So this is the face of the lion, the glory of God revealed in Matthew in the face of Christ that reveals the face of the lion. This is the first face of God that we're going to talk about, that we have talked about. And this is glorious. When you start to read Matthew, which I encourage you to do, read it, pay attention to things, pay attention to the uniqueness of it, the little details, because God's going to start showing you his face in the face of Christ, revealed in the glory of that face of the lion. God bless you. Have a wonderful day.